Okay, so we've looked at the project map, the view map, and the layout book. And now we're going to look at the specific view settings. Because the view settings are really what define how these individual viewpoints are utilized. So the first thing to look at is the layer combinations here. The layer combinations are pretty simple. They're on and off switches for different layers. Over here on the left-hand column, we have the layer combos. Over here on the right, we have the individual layers. Now, elements, the walls, beams, columns, slabs, live on a layer or have a layer associated with them. The layer combination determines whether that layer is visible or not. So if I look at my enlarged floor plan, for example, I can see that I'm showing my columns both concealed and visible. I can see that I've got my floor, slab, floor finish, all of my stair layers. Exterior accessories are off, while intersecting is off. If I want to turn a layer on in this layer combination, there's a couple of different ways to manage what layers are visible or not. The first thing I can do, if I want to show the AWOL plan only, I can turn that layer on. Oh, let's hit reserve first. This is a teamwork file, so you do have to reserve before you can edit. So turn that layer on and then say update. I can also, for example, go to my beams visible layer right here in the layer side and then look at the layer combos that should be visible on. So I can say, yeah, beams visible, I want to show that on floor plan and layout plan and site plan. And I've updated those layer combos over here, so I don't need to click update because I've been automatically updating those here. One thing that's critical though is that when those layers are visible, they should be intersection group 1. So what this means is that anything that's on this group is going to interact with other things on that group. We have 3 primary intersection groups that we use. 0 is used for a layer that's not visible, that we do not want to interact with any other layer, even other layers that have a group 0. 0 is will not interact, will not intersect. Group 1 is used for elements that are visible or that we do want to interact, intersect, react to other elements in that group. And then group 2 is the exception. We have these layers that say specifically non-intersecting, for example. So those are used for layers that we do not want to intersect with other element types. An example of this would be if I turn on non-intersecting and roof trim and accessories, and let's just switch this to group 1. So now we have roof trim and accessories and roof non-intersecting. The layer combo is technically custom because I haven't updated anything, but for the purposes of demonstrating intersection groups here, this will work just fine. So these 2 layer types, these are basically the same function, but I don't want these 2 elements on these 2 layers to interact with each other. An example of this would be if I have a sloping beam right here, for example, and then a fascia running across that. So let's just go ahead and take this same beam but make it horizontal, and let's go ahead and get rid of the segmentation of that. Oh. There we go. We'll do something like that. Oh, and this has to be 9.25 inches, something like that anyway. So I have a horizontal beam acting as a fascia running across all of these other beams right here. If I look at what that does in 3D, sloping beams are notoriously bad in ArchiCAD. They like to intersect and try to find that miter, but they don't work. It does not work to do that. So what we can do is we can set this, instead of beams visible, we can set it to that non-intersecting layer. And that's going to allow those 2 things to run over each other, interact with each other, but not intersect with each other. So that's that intersection group 2 and what that's used for. Other layer settings are things like locking. So for example, when we've actually placed our grids, the AG grids down here they're set to lock by default. And then lastly, we have this wireframe option. So that would be if we're trying to compare maybe an IFC model that we brought in. Those IFC layers are going to be down at the bottom. Usually they'll be intersection group 999 or something like that, or 10,000 or whatever it is. It'll be a group that will never interact with our layers. And sometimes it's helpful to show part of those or part of our model as wireframe. And basically, if I go to this layer right here and switch that, you'll see what that looks like here. Just switches them to wireframe. It's not necessarily a setting that we use. In fact, all of our layer combinations by default are going to be all solid. I don't think we have a single wireframe layer in any of our layer groups. Now to look at the layer settings a little bit more detailed, the organization of this should be pretty straightforward as far as what layers these elements go on. So the A layers, these are architectural layers. These are layers that are essentially the building components. The shell and core of the building are here. And they're named in a way that should be relatively intuitive: beams, columns, foundation. We do have a demo layer, and that's specifically for markers. We don't want to hide things that are demolished by layer. We want to hide them by renovation filter. We'll look at renovation filter here in a little bit. These are all of the shell and core layers. Up at the top, we have a couple of specialty layers. SEO, that's solid element operations. We looked at that, trimming a wall to a roof. This is if you have a dedicated operator. So if you didn't have a roof that was in the right position to trim that sloping wall, for example, you could create a roof and put it on a hidden layer that's going to then trim that. So that layer is almost never visible until you need it. The layout layer, that's where you get like the hot spots and the fills and things like that that aid you in laying the views onto a sheet and snapping that drawing to specific points. The AC or civil layers, these are site elements and context. The electrical layers, AE. Annotation, there's quite a few annotation layers, and that's so that we can have independent control over marker types, over different dimensions, and tags and things like that. So we have like annotation layers, and this is so that we can use, again, that same first floor viewpoint can be used a dozen times or more for things like demo plans, foundation plans, layout plans, site plans, all of that, so you can have independent control over those different layer or types per view. We have the AI. This is all interior content: casework, trim work, appliances, millwork, furniture, decorations. We have the landscape layers. This doesn't get used too much. We're using Twinmotion now. So like trees would be modeled as columns specifically for Twinmotion references. But there are layers to put those on so they can essentially be hidden. Or if we have drafted content in our site plan, that can also be put on these layers. There's a layer for pools and hot tubs separate from the deck if we needed that control. Mechanical, registers, vents, ductwork, if we're doing the modeling of that stuff, all shows up here. Plumbing, there's only a couple of plumbing layers, and it's basically plumbing in the ceiling, fire protection kind of stuff. And then all of the plumbing fixtures, sinks, faucets, P-traps, whatever, all get put on that layer. There's some process layers, so these are things that you can use like as scratch paper. If you just want to like do an iterative study on the floor plan, you can set things to that layer. If we have consultants content that isn't part of a hotlink module, we can import that in and just dump it all onto a single layer if that's useful. And then we have stuff specifically for export. So if you had a note that needed to go out just to the structural engineer on his DWG, and you wanted that to be maintained on our plan for future reference, you could put that on the Z export layer. Over here on the left is the layer combos. These are named basically in alignment with our drawing organization. So A0 is cover sheet, site information, general notes. A1 is site plans, staking plans, all of those site detail information. A2 is all of our various floor plan types and large floor plans, layout plans, roof plan. A3 is elevations. A4 is sections and wall sections. A5 is our reflected ceiling plans. Now we use two different viewpoints for our reflected ceiling plans. We use a 3D document to show what's on the ceiling, and we use a floor plan to show what's from the cut plane downward. So walls, doors, windows, cabinets, casework. But everything from the cut plane upward uses a 3D document viewpoint, and that's using this layer combination here. We have our schedules have a specific layer combination that could be technically show all. We have interior elevations. A8 is exterior details. A9 is interior details. We also have APR layers. Those are our schematic design process layers. We have a couple of miscellaneous layer types right here for sketches and specifically for the layout book where we have all layers shown. We have a CSK layer, and then we have our X modeling layers. So these are user specific. So these are if you needed a specific layer combination, a custom layer combination for working on different things. If, for example, you're working on plumbing fixtures and ductwork and registers, you could create a new layer combination and just turn the layers on that you want over here. So, for example, I can turn off all the layers I don't want. Oops, don't want to drag those. So turn off all the layers that I don't want. Like I don't need to see any of the site layers. Maybe I don't want to see any of these, and I just want to see these layers. I can say new and X modeling plumbing mech working, and there's my working layer combo. It doesn't get applied to any of the views. It's just a layer combo that I can use. These X modeling are layer combos that the BIM drafter modeler can use to get quickly to the content that they're trying to edit, isolating things out. So they're not constantly reverting back to a custom layer combo or switching things off by individual layers. And then we have the Z modeling, or Z export layers. These are for specific file export functions. So we have modeling shell, show and unlock all, modeling for structure, sorry, these are the X. We have export for BIMX, MEP structure. We have IFC and DWG layer combos. The modules, these are for dumping a building into the site or into a site in a separate file. Export for SketchUp. And then we have Twinmotion, building and site layer combination. So that's where we can save out Datasmith files really quickly and update our Twinmotion file with current site and building content. So that is the layer combinations in a nutshell.